Hey, what's up? Sergio from Guitar Sound here. And lately, I've been seeing a lot of videos on YouTube, especially about mastering, where they're like, you need to put reverb, you need to put 2 glue compressors, you need to put this, you need to put that, and then they play the track and it sounds like shit. And I'm here to tell you that if you're a beginner, the worst thing you can do is start placing things on the master that you're not too sure of what they do. And secondly, that even if you are advanced, even if you know what you're doing, most of the time the master doesn't need that many things on it. And I'm gonna tell you here in this video the things that you need to put on the master, okay? These are the 2 things: equalizer and limiter. That's it. Those are the 2 things that you need. Now, you're probably being like, oh my god, but I put this on the master and it sounds great. Yes, okay. There are things that you can situationally use, but the things that you need to use on the master are equalizer and a limiter. I'm gonna show you what you do with the equalizer, okay? You place the equalizer on the master. You create a low cut and you place it around 25 Hertz, 30 Hertz, somewhere along those lines. Why is this? Because those frequencies are not audible, but they do affect the movement of some speakers and big systems. If you play them on a club, even if on your speakers it doesn't do anything, on a club it might do something pretty awful. So that's what you need to do with your equalizer. Now, some people do a high cut. That's not a terrible idea. It's not necessary, but it's not a terrible idea. It's a pretty good idea. And of course, situationally, if you think your track needs more highs, then you can boost the highs. If you think it needs more mids, you can boost mids. You can cut if you think, of course, if it has a resonant peak, you can cut it. So on and so forth. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're doing too much with any given effect on the master, then it's not the master's fault. You need to go back to the mix and fix it there, okay? The other thing, people are using the default limiter on Ableton. Okay, I'm sorry, but it's shit. I love stock plugins. I love stock effects, like the EQ8. I use a lot of the stock effects, but the limiter for mastering is absolute garbage, okay? You need to use something better, okay? And there are some free alternatives, there are some paid alternatives, but what I'm gonna show you here is my all-time favorite, which is Ozone 8 Maximizer. Okay, and how do we master our track? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that the limiter has to go last in the chain. No matter what you put on the master, even if you put more things on the master, it needs to be last on the chain. And generally speaking, you want a very fast release. Okay, and what are those situational things that you can use on your master? Well, as we talked about, equalizing, like doing cuts or boosts on the equalizer is just situational to whatever track you're creating. Besides that low cut, which is pretty standard, that you pretty much should do on every track. I can't think right now of a track that I wouldn't do that. But things that you can use situationally. The multiband compressor. The multiband dynamics is really good when on your track there are peaks and dips that are too far apart, and it is a little more surgical than the regular compressor because you can attack different bands of the spectrum, almost as if you were compressing different instruments. And that's something you could do as well. You could go back to the mix and it would be more precise, but it would take longer, of course. You could compress better each instrument individually. A disclaimer about the multiband dynamics is that if you overdo it, you're gonna kill your track completely, okay? Make sure to not over compress your track on the master because it's gonna sound ugly and it's not good. The exciter or any type of saturation, any type of distortion on the master, that is a creative and artistic choice and a mastering choice. If you think a track needs a certain frequency, instead of boosting it, you may prefer to saturate it in some way. That could be something you could do. What else? The dynamic EQ. Well, a dynamic EQ is kind of like a multi-band compressor in which you can create bands, individual bands that will be modified and changed being triggered by the input of the sound, the volume of the sound being input. So you can use that to reduce peaks that don't allow you to get the loudness you want overall, maybe things like that. The stereo imager, okay? The stereo imager is so important. A lot of the times we don't really nail the stereo part of our track on the mix. That's where the stereo imager comes in. You can reduce the stereo of the lows, you can increase the stereo of the highs. But remember, if you put a stereo imager on your track and you're making your sub bass mono, and when you mute it your sub bass is stereo, then you need to go back to your mix, okay? That's not acceptable. You need to fix those problems on the mix, and then the mastering effects need to be a little enhancement. If there's too much difference between the character and the color of your track before mastering and after mastering, probably something's wrong with mixing. Those would be all of the things that I would personally use on a master situationally. Having the EQ and the limiter being on every track I ever make, okay? If you like this video, I have a PDF with 30 mixing and mastering tips that you're probably gonna love, and it's gonna be down in the description and in the comments somewhere. Download it and read it all. It's gonna be full of tips that you're gonna love. And yeah, if you liked it, make sure to like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and peace.